Hey guys, it's Charles Yeager with RocketStock. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a day to night scene with drone footage. Alright guys, so you've probably seen the day to night effect before. However, we're going to be doing this on drone footage. So our footage is going to have a little bit of movement to it. So we'll need to do some tracking in order to help sell kind of the lighting effects in order to make the scene actually look like it was shot at night. This effect can also come in pretty handy if you actually are filming with a drone, because a lot of times filming at night with a drone can be a little bit more hazardous. So using this effect and kind of tweaking it so that it looks like night can be pretty convenient and a lot safer depending on whatever project you're working on. And so we're going to be looking at two examples, one with a vehicle with some headlights and another with a house and then a window, making it look as if it's lit up. I do want to mention, if you download the project file for this tutorial on the RocketStock blog, I've included some of the footage I'm going to be using here, and you can dig into that and you can use the footage to follow along. You can also dig into the project file a little bit more if you want to as well. So let's go ahead and get started creating this day to night shot. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to right click and I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. And on that adjustment layer, I'm just going to name that night grade. So we're just going to apply some coloring effects to this to make it look as if it's a little more nighttime mood. And so with that layer selected, I'm coming to effect and then color correction, and we're going to go to tint. And at nighttime, everything's pretty desaturated. So I'm going to set this around 70. You can see it just takes a lot of the color out of that. And with it selected, I'm going to go to effect and then color correction, and we're going to do a curves effect. So with the curves effect, I'm just going to come here and I'm going to select the top point on the curves line. I'm just going to drag it down quite a bit to darken everything up, you can see. And I'm going to add another point here, just drag it down, add a little more contrast to that. You can see we've really darkened this up. And let's go over here, I'm going to select the red channel, and I'm just going to pull this down a little bit, and then I'll add some teal, you can see, onto everything. And then I'm coming over here to the blue channel, and I'm just going to move it up a little bit. So now we've kind of got that blue grade on here. And then just to pull these highlights down a little bit more, I might select that top point and kind of bend it down just a touch more. You can see it's kind of taking the bite out of those highlights. Now right now, this is our nighttime kind of color grade, but it's going to look a lot more convincing when we add in those headlights. And it's just really going to help trick the eye a lot more to believe that this was actually shot at night. So for the time being, I'm actually going to turn that adjustment layer off for visibility. We're going to select our Jeep aerial clip here, and we need to actually track the camera of this footage. Now I have the tracker panel already open over here, but if you don't, just come over here to window and just come down here and select tracker. That'll open that up and you can dock that. So I'm just going to go ahead and select track camera. Now while this actually tracks the footage, I'm just going to speed up here to when this is finished. Alright, looks like the tracking has completed. And go ahead and move the current time indicator through this so we can see those track points sticking to the scene. Now what I want to do is I want to create a solid basically somewhere in front, kind of where the headlights are going to be. That looks pretty good right there, you can see, or even right there. Just some flat area in front of the Jeep. And so while I'm hovering my mouse there, I'm going to just right click, and I'm going to select create a solid and a camera. Now we can see that solid layer, and we can see the camera over here as well. And so what I want to do is actually want to select that solid that we created. I'm just going to zoom in here on this. Now you can see we have the Y, Z, and the X axis. We don't want to move this around too much, and we definitely don't want to move it on the Z axis because we want it to stay level with the ground. But I'm actually going to select the rotation tool here, and I'm going to rotate this so that the Y, the green arrow, is pointing toward the Jeep, because that's actually going to be the top of this solid, and that's going to come in handy here in just a second. I'll show you. So I'm going to kind of line this up, basically pointing it in between the two headlights. And if I want to as well, I can actually go ahead and move this on the Y-axis, move it a little bit closer to the headlights, or conversely, I could just hit S on the keyboard here and I could scale this up a little bit more if I needed to as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and now make sure this doesn't overlap over the Jeep anywhere, and just make sure that's sticking to the ground there. It looks pretty good. And we can move this a little bit more later if we need to. So what I'm going to do with the track solid selected, I'm going to go over here to layer, and we're going to select pre-compose. And I'm just going to name this lights. And I want to select leave all attributes into this clip and go ahead and select OK. So what we've created is a new composition right there, so we can just go ahead and double click into this lights composition. And so this is where we're going to actually add our headlights. Included with the project file, I've included this image here, this headlight matte image. I'm just going to drag and drop that in. And we can see it's a little bit bigger than this square. So with it selected, I'm going to come here to layer, and then under transform, I'm just going to select fit to comp. And you can see it kind of has this outline of like headlights, and it's feathered off really nicely. This was an image that I created just using some 3D lights and After Effects, but it really helps speed up the workflow if you just have this pre-rendered image. However, if you guys want to actually dive in and check out how I created this, in the project file, I've got this over here, the original lights comp. So I can double click in here and you can see this is the original composition I actually created these lights with. And you can go in here and you can see the single light. So what it is, it's just a spotlight that's feathered with a solid. And so if you want to change this up or maybe create your own set of lights for a different type of vehicle, you can feel free to do that as well. However, in this tutorial, I'm just going to continue to use the image that we have here. It's pre-rendered. So let's go ahead and jump back over to our Jeep aerial composition. And now we can see the lights have been laid in here over the solid in that composition. And so what we can do now, if we need to, we can actually line this up or rotate it a little bit more, just so it looks a little more correct. And we'll rotate it here on the Z-axis just a little bit. Maybe move this on the Y-axis as well. And just kind of rotate. Make sure that's lining up nicely. All right, so I think that looks pretty good. It doesn't have to be perfect, as we're gonna see in just a second, because it's gonna kind of create an illusion with the eyes there, and it's gonna be pretty difficult to tell if it is drifting a little bit or anything like that. So now what we need to do is I'm gonna select my original clip down here, and I'm gonna hit Command D or Control D on a Mac. That's gonna duplicate that footage. I'm gonna move that duplicate copy up underneath the lights composition. And what I'm gonna do here is I'm actually gonna turn back on that night grade adjustment layer we created. And we won't see it right now because our other footage is above it. But with that second copy of the footage we created, come over here to Track Matte. And if you don't see this, you might see a button down here that says toggle the switches. You can go ahead and click that. But I've got it available right here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select Luma Matte. And what that's gonna do is that's gonna Luma Matte from that lights matte we have created. And now that's tracking to the footage, we can go ahead and scroll through here and you can see how this is working. So now we can see the original footage actually coming through that night grade. And it really helps give that illusion that that is lit up. Now if you're using different footage, you can see the original footage has a little bit of a blue tint to it, and I feel like that kind of accents this look. If you wanted to, you could select this footage here and you could apply a color correction curves effect to that. If you wanted to tweak the color of the light, you can see if I come in here and we'll go to the red channel. If I want to make this red, you can see we can adjust the color of the light this way if we wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. But you can see this looks pretty good and it helps sell the shot quite a bit more. Now the one glaring thing we can see here is that the headlights of the Jeep, they're kind of darkened because they're still being affected by this night grade. And so we need a way to actually make those light up and really help sell that they are lighting up and illuminating the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the original footage down here again, and we're going to Command D or Control D on a Mac to duplicate that. And with that new copy we created, I'm going to move it to the very top. And with that footage selected, we're going to do Layer. Then we are going to pre-compose this, and we're going to name this Headlight Bulbs. And then with this one, we're actually going to select Move All Attributes to a new composition and go ahead and select OK. And I'm just going to double click on that composition to go into it. So now we see we have a copy of our Jeep footage. Now what we need to do here is actually select it. We're going to do Command D or Control D to duplicate that again, so we have two copies. And what we need to do is mask around the lights of the top copy. Now it's a lot easier than it sounds. It's not going to be very complicated roto work. And I'm actually going to move to the very end of the clip here where we can see both of the headlights really easily. And I guess I should point out as well, on this shot I had the headlights of the Jeep on. And that's going to make things a lot easier because we're going to do another kind of Luma Matte trick to isolate these lights. So if you are going to film this day to night with a vehicle, I definitely recommend turning the lights of the vehicle actually on. It'll just make this process a lot easier. So I'm gonna select the pen tool here, and I'm gonna have Roto Bezier checked on up here just for this little section. What we're gonna do is I'm just gonna create a very rough outline around the headlights. I don't wanna get anything else into this, that's light colored, because again, we're gonna be doing a Luma Matte, so I definitely wanna avoid the bumper area here. I might get some other light things like this logo here, but that really won't affect it, but this bumper, with it being that bright, probably would. So I wanna avoid that if possible. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to hit M on the keyboard for mask. And I'm going to check a keyframe there at the very end for mask path. And we're just going to move down a few seconds in time. And you can see how the mask got offset. But I'm going to select the selection tool here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the mask and you'll get this edging around it. And this makes it very easy for us to just kind of roughly move this. So I'm going to select the corner and just rotate this and just move it back over so that both the lights are covered up by that. And we're just going to do this a few times. So I'll just double click on the mask, rotate it. Just make sure it's covering both lights. And you can see it's pretty straightforward, not going to require that much keyframing and roto. And what I recommend doing too as well on the mask, if we go ahead and check down the options here for the feather, I'm going to set this on something like 6, just very small amount of feather there. And I'm going to scroll through here to make sure that's staying over the lights the entire time. We can see. And that looks pretty good. If you see an area where it gets kind of close, like right there, I'm just going to go ahead and just adjust the mask here. And I'll just create another keyframe there just to ensure that it is over the lights the entire time. All right, I think that looks pretty good. So what we can do now on that Jeep layer, I'm gonna go ahead and it's got the 3D camera tracker already applied to it from when we duplicated that. I'm gonna go ahead and delete that effect. And now I'm gonna apply the effect, color correction tint again. And that's gonna make that black and white. We can see that here now. And I'm also gonna apply a levels effect. So that's under color correction and levels. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to kind of crunch this up a little bit here, darken it up, just so we're really kind of getting a stark contrast between the headlights and the black grille. Again, we're going to use this for a Luma Matte. So if we come down here on our footage, we have the second copy down here. Under track matte, we're just going to select Luma Matte. Now you can see we've basically just isolated those headlights. We have the original headlights right there. You can see when I scroll through here, we just see those headlights. If I turn on transparency, you can see it's just the lights there. So that's pretty cool. So let's jump back over to the original Jeep aerial composition. And now we can see that those lights are now being applied on top of the Jeep. So they actually look like they're on. And we can help sell this a little bit more with that composition selected and come here to effect. Come down here to stylize and we'll do a glow. And you can see it just adds a little bit of glow, maybe increase the radius here and the intensity just to brighten those up a little bit more and kind of help sell that the lights are on. Now you can see how this looks. And it's all tracking to the actual scene. Now we can help sell this even more by adding in a little bit of subtle fog in the sky. However, we're going to do that in the second shot we look at here, which is going to be this aerial of the house and a window. So you can see we have this aerial shot here of this home with the drone just kind of rising up. And we have these windows here. They're going to be really perfect to make light look as if it's coming out of one of them. And we're going to actually add in some of that fog into this scene. So I'll show you guys that near the end. So with this particular shot, what I've went ahead and already done, I've already added in a night grade layer here, you can see. And we'll need to tweak this a little bit more. Obviously, it's a little too saturated, but I'm gonna show you a few tricks we can do with that a little bit later. So I'm gonna go ahead and toggle that back off. And on the actual footage, I've already tracked the camera, just as we did with the Jeep shot. So if I go ahead and select the clip and select the 3D camera tracker, we can see the points here already are on the footage. And I wanna try to illuminate this top corner window. So if I just highlight above that, we can see we get the target there. I'm just gonna right click, and I'm gonna select create a solid and a camera. And so now we have that solid. We want to make sure the solid completely covers up the window. So just go ahead and scroll through here. Make sure it's over the window the entire time. And if not, again, just select the solid, hit S on the keyboard, and you can scale it up. Just make sure it's coming from that particular point. So what we actually need to do here, we're going to pre-compose the solid, the camera, and the house footage. But what I actually want to do is I want to duplicate the camera. So I'm going to hit Control-D or Command-D on a Mac to duplicate the camera. And then I'm going to select our footage. I'm also going to hit Control-D, Command-D on a Mac to duplicate that. So now we have two copies. And I'm going to select this copy of the footage, move it up, and I'm going to move this camera down. So what I've got here is a solid, a camera, and our footage. I'm going to select all three of those by holding Shift. And with them selected, I'm going to come here to Layer. And then just come down here to Pre-Compose. And we're just going to call this window comp. And we're going to select move all attributes into a new composition and go ahead and select OK. So now let's go ahead and dive into that window composition. And once we're in here, I'm going to select the solid. And what we need to do is we need to mask out that window. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn it off for visibility, but I'm going to leave it selected. And I'm going to select the pen tool again up here. And this time I'm actually going to turn off Roto Bezier because this is a square window, so I don't really need any rounding edges. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a square around this window. It doesn't have to be perfect, as you'll see a little bit later. I mean, if you can keep the line straight, by all means, definitely do that. But it doesn't have to be perfect. So now that we've created that mask around the window, I'm going to turn the visibility of the window back on. And now I'm just going to zoom out, and we're going to scroll through and make sure that's tracking to the window. And it looks pretty good. I'm actually going to select it, and I'm going to hit M on the keyboard for mask. And I'm just going to come down here to the feather. And I'm going to set it to something like 20. This will come into play a little bit later, because the light, the way it's going to kind of spill out of the window, is going to be affected by the feather of this mask. So that can help to have the feather at something like 20. So now what we need to do is I'm going to select my footage here. I'm going to move it right underneath that solid. And for track matte on this footage, I'm going to select the alpha matte. And now we can see it's just isolated the window there. If we go ahead and scroll through this, you can see we've just isolated the window. So that's going to be pretty convenient for us to create this effect, and we can overlay that back on top of our aerial shot of our house. However, we need the window now to actually look as if it's lit up, and we need to do a little bit more color correction onto this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all three of these layers again. So just hold Shift, select all of them. We're going to go to Layer and then Pre-Compose. We're just going to call this Original Window. And again, move all attributes into a new composition and go ahead and select OK. And on this composition, we're actually going to duplicate that. So Control D, Command D on a Mac. So we have 2 copies. And we're going to Luma Matte these together again, similar to what we did with the Jeep headlights. However, on this top copy, first we're going to apply the Effect Color Correction Tint. And we're going to do something a little different here. We're actually, since we want to do a Luma Matte, I actually want to invert this because I want the light to only be shining through these window squares, and I want to mask each one of those. And we can see this edging is white here. So what I'm going to do is with the map to black, I'm actually going to select that. I'm going to make that white. And for the map white too, I'm going to select it and make it black. So you can see how this is kind of coming together here. That's going to look as if the light's coming through the window. And since the rest of the house is going to be dark, we're going to kind of hide that with this window frame, with it being dark. And it's just going to look more realistic. However, we need to kind of crunch the colors a little bit more. So I'm going to apply the Effect Color Correction Levels. And I'm just going to bring the bottom arrows here up to where our footage is, just to kind of crunch the colors there together. I'm actually going to drag the gamma down a little bit as well. You can see it's also going to darken the blacks there. So now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to turn off the visibility of that window layer. Now on our second copy we have below that, I'm going to apply the Effect Color Correction Tint to that. And on this copy with the map black too, I'm actually going to change this to be the color we want coming through the window. So something just yellowish orange should be fine. And we can tweak this a lot more later, so it doesn't have to be perfect right now. So I'm going to go ahead and select OK. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn back on our top copy. And on the bottom copy, I'm going to set it to a Luma Matte under the track matte. So now you can see we've isolated that yellow color there. And if I turn on transparency, you can see it's just the window area, not the window frame. So that's really convenient for what we want. So let's go back over here to the main composition of the house. And now we can see we have that orange coming through the window. And it's tracking to the shot. So now we can go ahead and turn back on the night grade adjustment layer. And when I do that, we can see on this particular shot, so this is a pretty good example of a difficult shot. So this shot again was filmed and it wasn't intended for it to be a day to night scene. And so you can see we have some really bright white areas and we have some very harsh shadows shot at midday. And so the shadows, we're going to try to help sell that this was actually like moonlight shadows. So it's a very full moon. However, the white areas on this house can pose a little bit of a problem. Again, these aren't blown out, but they're right on the edge of kind of being too bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to kind of crush this, level this back out a little bit. So on the footage in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply Effect Color Correction Levels. And I'm just going to adjust the output white, black, and gamma over here. Do a little bit of tweaking. You see as I bring up the blacks here, it's just going to kind of help fade the colors together. Almost making it look like it was like log footage. We're just trying to lower that contrast so it's not quite as extreme. And I can tweak the gamma as well. So it's just kind of fading the footage out a little bit. Now we're also going to apply a tint effect. This is very important on this shot with high saturation. So I'll come over to Effect, Color Correction, and Tint. And I'm nearly going to leave this at 100%. I'm probably going to set it maybe like something like 90. But we don't want very much color at all coming through this. And if I turn that night grade back on, you'll see why. Because I really just want it to be this actual night grade. So you can see this is pretty dark and maybe difficult to see with the tutorial. I've got some other tricks that will kind of help bring this out a little bit more later on, but I might come up here and adjust the output black a little bit more for the gamma. So I may brighten this up just a little more than I probably would, but just to make sure you guys can see this with the tutorial. Again, we're trying to emulate a full moon type night atmosphere. So now we can add a little bit of glow to this window to help sell that and just composite it into the scene a little bit better. So I'm going to select the window comp and I'm going to apply the glow effect. So Effect and then Stylize Glow. And then while we're doing that, I want to apply the Effect, Color Correction, Hue, and Saturation. So on the glow effect, I'm just going to adjust the glow threshold, bring it down a little bit. And for the radius, I'll increase that. And you can see how it kind of emulates light coming out of the window. And since I'm going to add some fog in here, a little bit of glow coming out the window like this will composite pretty conveniently. And then we can adjust the intensity of this as well. And then for the coloring, what I like to do is adjust it with this hue and saturation effect. So if I want to tweak kind of the yellow color, I can just adjust this with hue and saturation just by adjusting the master hue. And then for the saturation, I think it's definitely way too saturated, at least for this particular shot. And I'm going to drag that down so it desaturates the light. And then we can go ahead and increase the master lightness to kind of brighten it up as well. And that'll kind of tie in with that glow. And just kind of tweak this depending on your shot till you get a nice blend. So I think that looks pretty good. If we go ahead and scroll on this footage, we can see how that window looks as if it's illuminated. Now, earlier I mentioned adding in some fog as 3D track to our footage. And what I've got here, if we're coming over to the project panel, I've got a fog clip, and this came from the Action Pack light that's available on RocketStock. They have a fog collection called Vapor, and this is one of the clips from that. So I'm just gonna drag and drop that into our composition. Now we can see that fog here. Now I wanna make sure this fog matches my frame rate. So with the fog here in the project file, I'm just gonna right click it, and I'm gonna select Interpret Footage, Main. And we can just adjust the frame rate here under Conform Frame Rate. I'm just gonna change this to be the frame rate of my footage, which is 29.97, and go ahead and select OK. And then with the fog layer selected here, I'm gonna make it 3D, and then I'm gonna set it to be a screen blending mode. And now we can see that fog here, and we may need to adjust it, but if I go ahead and scroll through the footage, you can see the fog is now tracking into the shot. And this is some really nice 4K slow motion fog. And so what I actually may need to do is I may need to scale that up. So I'll hit S on the keyboard, scale it up a little bit. I can move it back in Z space if I want to as well. And you can layer this to really kind of give some depth to this. Now right now it's a little too bright, a little too sharp. So with the fog selected, I'm gonna come over to Effect. I'm just gonna come over here to Blur and Sharpen, and I'm gonna select a Gaussian blur. And I'm just gonna increase this just to blur out that fog a little bit so it's not as sharp. And then I'm gonna hit T on the keyboard for opacity and just bring the opacity down. We want this to be pretty subtle, but just having that parallax added onto the scene will help sell that it is a night shot. And you could do this as well with the Jeep shot. But again, you could duplicate this, layer this throughout the shot. I think that's what I did with the original preview shot you see. And the more you layer composites into a scene like this, it's just gonna help sell that night scene. Now you will need to watch out when you do add this in as a screen blending mode. Sometimes it can kind of brighten up the footage, so you may need to come back down here and adjust your night grade as well. Another thing is if you upload night scenes like this that are dark to YouTube, they can be very prone to compression. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna zoom out here, I'm gonna right click, and I'm gonna do a new adjustment layer. And I'm just gonna go ahead and name this Noise. And then with that layer selected, I'm gonna come over to Effect, and we're just gonna come down here to Noise and Grain and just select Noise. And I'm gonna leave Use Color Noise on. I'll set this around anywhere from 2 to 4. So I may set this up to 4. If we zoom in here, we can just see it's gonna add some noise onto the footage, and 4 may be a little bit high, but again, the more we add, that's just gonna prevent any color banding that probably will occur when you upload this to YouTube. Again, it's very difficult for dark colors to come through without compression. So again, we're trying to kind of preemptively combat that. All right, one other trick I wanna show you here with the light, because we actually have this in its own layer, we can do some cool tricks with this. So I can actually select the end of the layer, and I'm just clipping the end of the clip. I'm not actually moving it, but if I move this over, you can see we can emulate the light kind of coming on or turning off using this technique. So that's pretty neat. Or if you had like a horror film or something like that and you want to kind of show like a gunshot or something go off, you could just have it be for one frame, and you can see how it comes on and turns back off. Or if you wanted to tweak the coloring of it or anything else you wanted to do, but this gives you that option when you're using this technique. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial creating a day to night scene using drone footage. Hopefully picked up a few compositing tips you can use maybe in a future project of yours. Don't forget you guys can download the project file, which is going to have some of the drone footage I used in this tutorial from the RocketStock blog. And while you're there, check out the other tutorials they have on the site and the freebies as well, where you can also download the Action Pack Light Pack for the fog that I used in this tutorial. Alright guys, this has been Charles Yeager with RocketStock. Thanks for watching.